Now, I don't know how many of you know George Runner. I met him briefly moments ago. He's a former assemblyman and a senator here in California, and he's authored the Amber Alert System, which if you sign up to 7788, I think you get messages. In 2006, along with his wife, then Assemblywoman Sharon Runner, they authored Prop 83, which is California versions of Jessica's Law, and it passed by 71% of the vote, and I believe Jessica was a girl here in the North Bay that came up missing, if I'm not mistaken. That was a bit ago. He's the vice chair of the California State Board of Equalization and the only publicly elected tax commission in the United States, and he's a Republican member representing the board's 1st district. So let's give a big hand to George Runner and give him a good welcome, please.
George, God bless you. Thank you, and good evening. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to make a few remarks, some observations, some things that are happening, but then try to leave as much time as possible for specific questions that you may have about what's happening. I always like to start off to help you understand at least where I'm coming from. I believe Californians are overtaxed and overregulated. Now, I don't know if you feel that way, but I do. Unfortunately, as we even watched this last week and continue to watch in the legislature in this year, it just continues to get worse. I also would normally say that I am proud to be unique in California, or unique in the United States, to where California is the only state that has this elected tax board that basically deals with appeals, along with administering some tax agencies, that has an elected tax board, and therefore we represent taxpayers when they come before us and when they appeal. It's very unique. Rather than going to bureaucrats and the process that happens in all the other states, you actually sit before your peers as you tell your tax story and your complaint and your concern, and therefore have individuals that then make a decision for you in regards to that tax appeal. Unfortunately, I can't tell you that anymore, because last week the legislature changed that. Now, the governor has got it on his desk, but it's the governor's plan. So I assume he's going to sign it. And so what the legislature did last week in the budget process, which is another part of the story that we probably ought to talk about, is they stripped the Board of Equalization from our ability to do two things. Number one, to investigate tax issues in our districts, where it is that we feel like there's been a tax offense or there's a problem, for us to be able to go in, talk to, and deal with the auditors or whoever it is that we believe may have been offended the taxpayer. And they also stripped away our ability to be able to deal with appeals. So now, starting actually in January of next year, rather than if somebody has a tax appeal with their income tax or any other of the tax and fees that California has, rather than appear in front of an elected board, you get to appear in front of state employees in order for them to hear your concern. I can tell you how that's going to go. And that's exactly the concern and why it is that it got changed. For many years, the legislature, and well, maybe not so much the legislature, but the governors of California have wanted to control all the revenue agencies. The Board of Equalization basically, in the past, has oversaw about the collection of about $60 billion, about 40% of the tax revenues. Mainly the big one being sales and use tax, but then a series of other fees and taxes that have been a part of what it is that the board dealt with, or that the legislature then would give responsibility to the board to work with. And so in that sense, it was always a concern for governors who would rather have control of the revenues, because they didn't like what it is that citizens appeared before us, and we heard their appeal that we would find for them instead of the tax collector. And so eventually, unfortunately, and you know, I feel bad for this, and that there was a series of behaviors by a couple of board members that created an atmosphere that allowed then the governor to take advantage of that, and also legislators to be able to strip that away. And I think that's unfortunate. I think ultimately the losers in that are taxpayers in that process, because you have now lost the ability to go before peers. And instead, like I said, you're going to go before actually a panel of 3 state employees. When I hear an appeal, when I'm on the board and I hear an appeal, and I guess I'll be doing that now at least to the end of the year, because it takes them a while to start new agencies. I got to deal with folks, or I get to deal with issues that deal with the idea of these are constituents. And I get to hear and listen to them as if they are constituents, because they are. They are folks that elected me to be able to ensure that they are fairly treated and that citizens are fairly treated as they deal with a complex tax process. Unfortunately now, what's going to take place is you're not going to, instead of hearing from somebody who looks at you as a constituent, Californians are going to appear before people who are going to benefit from the fact that they collect the tax, because they're state employees. And that's the change that I think will make a very big difference. The other thing they changed, and this takes place starting July 1st, when I have appeals, and we have appeals that come before us as a board, one of the issues that we do is we contact every taxpayer who has an appeal before us, even if they don't contact us, because we want to know their story. We want to know what happened, what the situation was, what took place, how did the auditor treat you, what was the process for that. And we could talk with them, and they could come meet with us. And we could hear their story, and we could talk about it, and we were informed then when it is that we sat before them in a hearing, and they were actually then telling the board as a whole that story. Unfortunately, the other thing that the legislature did is they took that away. They now do not allow me, starting July 1st, to have conversations with taxpayers who have appeals. Again, they believe that wasn't fair. Well, it wasn't fair, they believed, I guess, to the state employees and the state tax collectors. But it certainly was fair to the taxpayer. One of the things I like to remind people is the appeals that came before us, and they continue to come before us now until January 1st, we'll get some really big appeals. There'll be some big companies, whether it's AT&T or Chevron or somebody else, who may have an appeal. But by far, the average appeal that comes to us maybe, can be any range from anything from $500 to $15,000. And they are citizens that come before us unrepresented. They don't have the money to pay for an accountant or a tax attorney to come and represent them. They're just on their own, coming and telling their story and talking about why it is that they believe the system mistreated them. That's why we reach out to those individuals. We want to hear their stories. We want to find out what's going on. And I can tell you, under the current system, many times the taxpayers win, because what we're able to do is add an element of common sense. What is the intent of the law? Is this really what we meant to do? Is this really what the legislators meant to do when this law was passed? Did the state employee treat reasonably the taxpayer? So that's what we can go ahead and do as we go into a hearing. And unfortunately, that all changed. Now, the other thing that's interesting is the interesting name that they gave this particular bill that they did was called the Taxpayer Transparency Act of 2017. Somehow as if you label it, therefore it's true. And again, you got to understand what they did here. Nobody saw this language until last Monday. Last Monday was the first time this language is even set before the public and the legislature and voted on Thursday. Not very transparent. And again, just because you name something some way doesn't make it true. But again, what you try to do is you try to fool the public. And so all those legislators who voted for it can go home and say, I voted for the Taxpayer Transparency Act of 2017, as if somehow they did something favorably for taxpayers. Now, the good news I can tell you is that your legislators up here weren't fooled. They voted against it. They understood the right that was taken away from their citizens. So they voted against it. But in this state, unfortunately, right now, we have far more people in that legislature that are concerned about taking your money than protecting you as taxpayers. Now, the odd thing about this whole process, too, is in this process, when they did that, they created 2 new departments. So government got bigger, and they at least gave, I mean, and this is just a beginning amount of money, but they added $5 million more to start these departments. So again, in order to make it more efficient to collect taxes and act like they're protecting taxpayers, they just created 2 more government bureaucracies and added at least $5 million to cost to the state of California. And somehow that's supposed to be better for taxpayers. The other issue that's interesting in that one of the things that we do as a board is that we have a process for when regulations change. One of the roles and responsibilities the board had is we had, when a bill is passed, oftentimes it's required also to create regulations to implement the bill. And that was one of the roles of the Board of Equalization. Well, that's no longer our job. Now what you have are bureaucrats creating the regulation. When the board was responsible for creating a regulation, that board would then have its staff, would work on the regulation, and then in a public meeting, first of all, there'd be disclosure, there'd be an announcement that says, hey, on such and such a date, they're going to have a meeting, and in that meeting, one of the things we're going to talk about is regulation ABC. And there'll be a chance for then citizens to know about it. There'd be a chance for businesses to know about it. And there'd be an opportunity for them to come and speak on it. That's no longer the case. Instead now, these regulations are going to be passed through a bureaucratic process, which basically means that somewhere there'll be some notification and some publication. And people will have 30 days to go ahead and write in their concern, and that'll be the end of it. It'll just become like law. And so what you'll find is your tax agencies will become very much distanced from the citizen, without access in that process. So anyhow, that's unfortunately one of the byproducts that took place last week when the legislature passed the budget. And instead of taking the normal process when you do create big law like that, when you create 2 new agencies, spend millions of dollars, introduce a bill that is typically what you would do in January or February, have a series of hearings in one house so that the public can speak to it, so that legislators can talk about it, pass it off of one floor, and then go to the other house and have the same kind of committee hearings and discussions and the ability to amend and change it if they need to. That whole and then ultimately then pass that kind of a bill by August or September of that year. They did the whole thing in 3 days because they knew they couldn't pass public scrutiny in that process. So unfortunately, that's what we have before us. And as a result of that, I think we find ourselves, and I think I use that as an example only because it's so typical of what we deal with today in California. You saw another issue that I think was touched on as we were talking about that, and that is there's an effort down in Southern California to deal with a particular legislator who voted, it was kind of the final vote in order to raise your gas tax. Your gas tax is going up, and as a result of that, there was an effort to recall one of the legislators who voted for that. So what's the response of the legislature? Let's change the rules. Let's make it harder to do that. We can't have people accountable. We can't have people who actually have to pay a price for a bad vote. So what did they do? They went ahead and changed the rules that basically make it harder to do that. Why did they do that? Because they want to protect those people who then go and vote in order to take more money away from you. And that's an unfortunate byproduct of what we have here in California. So let me just say thank you for being part of the core of Californians who want to continue to make sure that people understand what's really happening. Because ultimately it's going to be groups like yours that are going to be in places to communicate that. When people say, how did this happen? Where did this what happened? How did this happen? It's going to be important for people to stand up and say, hey, remember, this is what we were telling you about. These are the things we said were going to take place. And to then provide the help and the direction for how it is that we kind of win back what we've lost here in this process. So those are the concerns that I think we should all have here in California. That's why it's important for you to do it and talk about it. It's important for you to keep the accountability at every level of government. I appreciated the fact that you talked about when your city councils are meeting, when your board of supervisors are meeting, when your school boards are meeting, because ultimately those are where these ideas begin to start. They start from. And as a result of that, keeping an eye on what's happening in government is so important in that process. So yeah, I'm going to just kind of pause there and see what questions you may have that I can answer for you, and discussions or issues that I need to kind of spend some time. I think there's mics here, and I'll be glad to entertain any of those questions, any and all of those questions. Yeah, there's mics right here and here, and okay, go for it.
What happened to the Constitution of the United States? How do these people even get able to do this? Don't they take oaths to uphold it? And what they're doing is against the Constitution. I don't understand how they get away with it. And what can we do to stop them from doing whatever they feel like they want to do to take from us? And I'm just a normal citizen. And the taxes and stuff, it's insane what they're doing to us, and there should be some way to stop this.
Okay.
And
let me speak to a couple of things there. First of all, the things that they did to us and the things they took away aren't in the Constitution. We were put into place to do those kinds of things by the legislature of past, by governors of the past. And so whatever you have that you can do as a result of what the legislature or the governors have given you in the past, they have the ability to take away. And so in that sense, they did. Because we actually, you mentioned it earlier, we live in a representative form of government, right? So these individuals are elected to represent the best interest, so-called best interest, of the citizens. So they have the ability to do that. Now, it's interesting because we do have other functions at the Board of Equalization that are in the state constitution. And they couldn't take those away. So we do have some roles that are left, dealing with some issues of supervision that we deal with, certain kind of tax issues and certain kind of agencies, areas that we have a relationship with, that are in the state constitution. And they couldn't take those away. Now, the only people who can take those away are the citizens. But right now, the things that they did take away are basically statutes, laws that the legislature had passed in the past. And so as a result of that, they removed those in order to create greater authority for themselves.
The other question I have is, like, if I have a job and I'm not doing my job, I get fired. All these people in legislators, wherever the government people are, they work for us, in theory, from what I understand. Why is it that they can never be fired if they're not doing their job? And yes, we elected them, but if I elected somebody that's lied to me, and now they're doing the opposite of what they told us to do, why can we not have any recourse to get rid of them people?
Well, first of all, you do. Remember, as I mentioned, your legislators voted the right way on this issue. So your folks who you elected voted the right way.
Okay.
So the problem is you don't have any say over the people who got elected from Los Angeles.
Okay.
And it was the people in Los Angeles, so at that point they are elected and they are fulfilling then some aspect of what they believe they're supposed to be doing. So in that issue of accountability, they would say we are being accountable to our constituents in voting this way. I think it's a problem. I think it's a mistake. And I think sooner or later, more and more people will understand that. But in that sense, it's hard for you to fire somebody who the people, 400 miles away elected.
Okay.
But that's why I wanted to at least give the report to you, is that your people voted correctly.
Thank you very
Okay?
much.
Yeah.
Okay, first I want to say with great gratitude, thank you for what you've been doing, and thank you for being here and
Thank you.
informing us. It's extraordinarily important, and I appreciate you.
I'm glad to do it.
Secondly, I did not hear what the vote on the Assembly floor was today on SB 231, moving the storm drain into the sewer fee that would cost us more money on our property taxes.
First of all, I don't watch every bill. So I'm not a member of the legislature, so I'm not even aware of specific bills because I don't, unless they somehow I get attached to them or I become following. So I'm not even sure, and I can't respond to the specific issue there. So I'm sorry, but they've got 5,000 bills and I've got my own job, and that's up to them. And that's, again, what your legislator does versus what I do. Yeah, question.
Hi, I'm Karen Liggett. I met you outside.
Uh-huh,
And thank
thank
you,
you.
Senator Runner, for your service to us. And my question is that I told you earlier I go after the pot industry to try to regulate them.
Right.
Now that the last 2 years that we got these laws implemented, how is it going to affect us trying to protect us from the pot industry with their taxes? Because a lot of them are doing black market.
Right.
So how are we going to be able to, as taxpayers, get the money from them?
Right. I think there's a couple of good thoughts in there that we need to talk about. First of all, like it or not, again, the public has voted certain issues in regards to their view in regard. I mean, I oppose medical marijuana and I opposed recreational marijuana.
I know
don't-
the wife did too.
I don't.
And
At
the
the end of the
wife
day,
did as
at the end of the
well.
day, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me as to why that's good for society. But people voted for it.
Yeah, and by
And
the
it-
way, your wife voted against it
What's
as
that?
well. Your wife did the same
Right,
thing in the
right.
the
And
Senate.
so at that point, then so now the question is, how do you regulate it?
Yeah,
How do you then regulate it to ensure that, number one, that the problems that it creates, issues are done, are at least, structured in such a way that minimizes them? And also then, how do you effectively then collect a tax in that process in order to be able to create some kind of benefit? One of my concerns is that I believe that there's this rush for money in taxation that is going to probably, in a weird way, over-regulate and over-tax the industry. And what that's going to do is just drive it underground.
they've already done it.
And because, as I remind people, these people are already really good at selling an illegal product. They've been doing it for a long time. They got lots of good practice. So the idea that somehow you're going to have this rush of dollars coming in, I think is just not there. And so you have to be very careful with that. The other issue is what are you going to do to protect the safety of kids and the products? Last year, actually, the legislature did a better job at creating a system of protection by creating what's called a three-tier system, where you have a grower, a distribution center, and a retailer. And the idea was at the middle point, the distribution center section is where you would have the idea of a clear taxation policy, of health benefits, not health benefits, but health inspections to ensure that what's taking place is the product says it does what it says it's going to do, and that you make all that clear. Unfortunately, the legislature this year undid some of that.
I noticed.
Which now makes me think that what they did last year was a better move than what they did this year, and creates a less safe situation for citizens in California. So we'll see. I think California's in a grand experiment here. I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to watch and see. So I think it's a matter of us keeping an eye on the legislature, seeing what takes place, and hopefully they'll be accountable for the decisions that they've made.
Well, I'll get back next year and I'll be fussing.
Okay, yes.
I retired from the State Board of Equalization.
Oh, did you? All right.
And so I wanted to find out, I worked for the attorneys,
Okay.
analysts. I worked on the appeals cases for the
Uh-huh.
legal department.
Okay.
So with this stupid change, how is that going to affect?
It's going to change it. What it is, all the appeals now moves over to a separate department.
So what, are they going to reduce the number of lawyers and analysts?
No, they don't reduce the numbers of lawyers.
Well, what I mean is they're going to send them to other parts of the state?
They're going to be a section of that used to do our appeals, and they're going to move over into a new department. And then instead of going before the Board of Equalization on these appeals, they're going to go to a whole nother group of people, which are then administrative law judges, which are just basically state attorneys. They're not elected judges. The state attorneys who happen to be labeled and called appeals justices or judges, and that's who you will appear in front of. You'll appear in front of 3 of them, and that's who will then decide your case.
Okay, so then the lawyers will stay put as it is, but they're just going to be part of a department.
They're going to be moving to this new department.
But they're going to stay in their same cubicles, right?
Probably. Yeah, I think they'll stay in their same cubicles. But again, this is where it is that they added the $5 million more. So rather than keep the system you had in place, they created a new system with more bureaucrats and more expensive. Yes?
Hi, I'm Linda Thompson. We just moved up here 2 years ago, and
From where?
From the Bay Area.
Okay.
But, I have a problem with, we now have to pay a fire fee.
Right.
To the State Board of Equalization, which is about sales tax. I'm not understanding why. I never saw a State Board of Equalization bill in my life.
Right. Yeah, let me just say, first of all, the state board does more than just sales tax. We have the legislature has given the State Board of Equalization in the past, of course it's all changed now, almost 40 different fees that we collect. So if you're, for instance, a gas station owner, the board also collected the underground storage fee. We also collect the fees that are on insurances. So we do far more, the board does far more than just sales and use tax. The difference was when the legislature passed what I believe is the unconstitutional law of fire fee,
Yeah, I do.
they assigned the Board of Equalization to be the collector of it. And
But
so
where does it go? Firemen don't get it.
well, where it goes, in theory, remember what that was all about. That was done a number of years ago when the state had a financial problem. And what they did is they took jobs that CAL FIRE was already doing, fire prevention, not fire protection, but fire prevention. That was the idea of educating taxpayer or landowners in regards to fire issues. And they decreased in the general fund the amount of money that was going to CAL FIRE that was paid for by general fund tax dollars. And then they created the new fee or tax, I believe it's a tax, and then in order to backfill CAL FIRE, in order to continue to do the same thing that they were doing. So as a result of that, you're paying money direct. I'm paying too. I'm one of those payers. I'm just like you. I now pay it every year.
But I don't even get protection.
No, you
I'm
don't.
way
There's no-
up in the mountains.
There's no protection. There's no protection in those dollars. There never was any protection in those dollars. And all it does is backfill what CAL FIRE was already doing. Now, there's a lawsuit out there, and I'm party of the lawsuit. I think it was done illegally. It was done with a simple majority vote bill. Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association is driving the issue. Unfortunately, the state attorney general continues to drag what used to be her feet, now it's his feet, in regards to providing information. So eventually it will go to court in order to determine whether or not the legislature actually did that. Now, I always remind people at this point, if you're paying that and it becomes unconstitutional the way they did it, you don't automatically get your money back for all those years you paid. You only get your money back if you filed an appeal every year when you paid it. So if you go to my website, georgerunner.com, there's a link there that reminds you how to do that every year. Now it's interesting. We actually sponsored a bill. I sponsored a bill for 2 years in a row kind of a silly concept. If a law is declared unconstitutional or illegal, then people should automatically get their money back. Unfortunately, the legislature couldn't find themselves to pass that bill. So you have to make sure that even if you don't like it, even if you pay it, you need to make sure that you file the proper paperwork every year, so that when it then does indeed then is declared unconstitutional, then you'll be able to then get your refund. Okay, yes.
Thank you, Senator. Last week, I attended a meeting in San Francisco, and I don't have a question, but I kind of wanted to share this with you. It's maybe one of those Paul Harvey things, the rest of the story. The Mineta Transportation Institute sponsored a meeting of all of the high-level transportation people at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. And one state senator was there, but all the people were very high-level bureaucrats of one type or another. So I was invited because some time ago I was involved with the high-speed rail project.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found out in the meeting was very much along the lines of what you're talking about, only it kind of went a lot further, because they were talking about how they're going to get all of this money. And you know, it's no secret, of course, that our state budget runs a little over $100 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
They need an additional $400 billion, of course, for the medical program and the insurance and all that. But in addition to that, the $50 billion that comes from the gasoline tax money, and of course the money from registration, does not pay for the transportation projects that are in the mill. And I know I'm saying a lot of things you already are well aware of, but what people may not be aware of is just how organized these people are and what they're doing. And by the way, I did notice, since all the guys are wearing suits, not one of them was wearing an American flag on the lapel. So that's just a little observation on my part. But they need $130 billion to meet just the transportation issues. And along the coast of California, and I hadn't heard this before the meeting, but along the coast of California, they've got to raise roads and other infrastructure because they're anticipating the oceans increasing in altitude or elevation, and they want to prepare for that ahead of time. So a lot of billions of dollars are going to have to go into those projects. As I listen to more and more of the information coming out of this meeting, I realize that we as taxpayers are not going to have any control whatsoever over what's going on with our money. I mean, I almost feel like, this is a takeover of our lives, of our finances, and
Mm-hmm.
you may or may not disagree with that, but somebody here a while ago asked, well, what can we do about it? And I've given that a lot of thought too, and I thought, the one thing, probably the only thing we can do, in my humble opinion, is we need to get people in office, elect people who will get these clowns out of office, and that's not an easy job, because as Republicans, most Republicans do not band together in unity like the Democrats do. The Democrats speak with one voice, and that's what we heard at that meeting. Republicans don't do that. We're like cats. We go in all different directions. And so to get people elected to office, somebody's got to be running for that office who's electable. And I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks in getting this accomplished. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Let me make a couple of observations. Number one, in that thought, number one is that there will never be enough money to satisfy those who want to spend your money. I mean, there never will be. They'll always want more. Unfortunately, oftentimes the things that we suffer from in regards to the tax increases, Californians have done to themselves. I mean, a lot of the new taxes or taxes that you pay right now are paid for because the people of California voted for them. And, you know, to me, the voters fell for the great lie, right? Whenever they want to raise taxes, whether they want to raise taxes, whether it's your transportation tax or whether it's an income tax, a sales tax, they'll do a couple things. Number one, they'll say you've got to do this because if you don't do this, people will die and kids won't get educated. Right? They'll make you feel like that's where you got to do this because if you don't do it, then these things will happen. The transportation issue that the voters or the legislature did is a great example of this. The money that just was raised for the transportation, the billions of dollars that's going to go to the tax that you're paying for now because of higher gas taxes and higher registration. Much of that money doesn't go for your roads. It's going to go for horse trails. You know, it's going to go for buses. But you know, when you heard them debate it in the legislature, nobody talked about we need more horse trails or bike paths or buses. What they talked about is how the roads were falling apart, how the bridges are falling apart. Because they know they needed to talk about that because they know if they talked about needing more buses or needing more trains that people wouldn't support it. So the legislature in that way does this great bait and switch. We talk about this because we get people say, oh yeah, I agree, yeah, we need to do that, but then they take the money and do this. And that's true when they go to voters too, right? When they need more money. We need this because we got to educate kids, we need this because we got to do this, but then they go ahead and start whole new programs. You know, whatever those programs are going to be. We're going to use money in order to, you know, fight the president on being a state that, you know, protects illegal aliens. So they didn't tell you that. They just did it. So I think those are the concerns I think people always have to be aware of. Now, you're right, you need to elect the right people, but the challenge that you all have is you've elected the right people. I mean, I know your representatives well, whether they be, I served in the legislature with Doug, I served in, you know, your legislature, your senators and your senator or assembly member, they represent you and they do it well. The problem is we're in all those other places in the state. So I think what's going to really call for is people who are people like you in this part of the state to understand the importance of electing people in other parts of the state in order to make sure that they are telling the truth. It's kind of like I just said. They're going to go home and tell everybody back home that they just voted for the Taxpayer Transparency Act of 2017, when in fact they did just the opposite, or the effect is just the opposite. It's not transparent and it does not protect taxpayers. But they can just quickly say that. And people will sit there and say, oh yeah, that sounds good, thank you. And that's the challenge that we have. So I think there's a lot of responsibility that we can take on, not only for here, but also how that works elsewhere. Yeah?
One more comment on why our voters are voting for taxes. And they addressed that at the meeting, and I found that very interesting also. There was a lady there, and I forgot her name or her title, but her job was strictly to find ways of making tax statements sound better to the voters than they really are.
Yeah.
And she does surveys. They do sample surveys, kind of like Bull on television, you know, with the court. But anyway, what happens is that she does these surveys until they find the right wording that actually makes something sound really good, even though it's really bad. And she, I found it very interesting that she was a person who does nothing but find those specific phrases and things that people will vote for, even though they're obviously not going to benefit them or anybody else. And it's,
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely true. And that's why it's important for groups like you guys to make sure that you are interpreting and looking carefully. That's why, I noticed in even in your publication, you've got thoughts and comments by your legislators interpreting what's going on, and I think that's important. If you don't get my mailing list or my newsletter, you should go get it. It's at georgerunner.com. You can sign up for the mailing list and our email blast. And every month we go through and talk about what's happening that way to try to keep people informed in that process. So if you just go to our website, we'll keep you, at least from our perspective, what's happening, particularly on the tax issues. Yeah, I think they're going to want you to go over there, though.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Where's the money coming from to fix Oroville Dam?
Well,
Having a full reservoir the first week in February was DWR or somebody's responsibility that never should have been full. They call that emergency spillway, and that's a parking lot to park your boat trailer. I've skied that dam for 25 years when I was a young man, and I want to know who is going to pay for that reconstruction of the spillway. And also, when they were building the dam, they used to have a railroad bringing the rock and everything up. They're going to destroy the roads. I'm just wondering who's going to flip the bill.
well, I'm afraid the answer is you are.
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
what I'm afraid
I
of.
guess that was probably a rhetorical question, but
Yeah, but what I'm going to say is who's accountable for what they did to that dam? Nobody has a right to fill that dam the first week in February at 900 all the way to the top. The first
Right.
when those hills are completely saturated, and then say it's a dam disaster. That was no dam disaster.
Right.
That was a failure of Sacramento.
and you're
And who's accountable for that?
and your legislators have pointed that out.
Yeah, who's
So-
accountable? No. No name has come out on that.
No, I've heard Jim Nielsen on that issue.
Yeah,
I've heard Jim.
I was talking to a guy, and he said, "Oh, that's the Army Corps of Engineers."
No. I got to be fair. You got to be fair. Jim Nielsen has spoken out on this issue.
Yeah.
He has pinned it on the people who it belongs to.
Yeah, right. And James Gallagher has too. God
Yeah.
bless them both.
Yeah, right.
Because you know what, dude? They're going to kill people. They'll kill people if that dam was.
Hey, look, you're talking to the choir here. You've got the right idea.
I
Your
know.
legislators are doing the right thing.
But somebody
Unfortunately,
needs to be
it's
held
all those other
accountable.
folks that from other parts of the state that think they don't even know where their water comes from.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Right.
That's a beautiful dam. That was
Yeah.
not a dam disaster
Right.
out there. It was a management disaster out of Sacramento.
You're correct. You're correct.
And number two question I've got is, if you want to grow marijuana around here, and everybody wants to grow marijuana and this and that, I think there should be tax money coming out of the sale of that to increase our law enforcement to protect the people from marijuana gangs.
No, and it's structured in such a way that it does.
Yeah.
Now, here's the problem, which I think, again, which I support, and that is, I believe every community ought to have the right then to decide what kind of involvement they want in that industry. So if somebody says, hey, I don't want to have any dispensaries, they ought to have the right to say that. If another community says, I don't want any growers, they should have the right to say that. That should be their right in order, in their communities, to keep their community then structured and experiencing the kinds of things that they should have. Now, on top of that, you're right. When taxes are paid on it, I supported a bill last year on excise tax on marijuana. Do I like marijuana? No. But if we're going to sell it, it ought to be taxed, and it ought to be taxed smart. So I supported a bill, excise tax, that the majority of the money went to law enforcement. The legislature didn't pass it. So what you're going to find is the majority of the money is going to go into the general fund. So that's where they can get their hands on it, and so that's where they can control the dollars. So again, that's the challenge that we have with how it is that the legislature makes their decisions right now. Yes.
What's going to happen to the board now that you're going to be part of? What are they going to do? Just get rid of the board? What
No,
is
the board is we have, like I said, we have certain constitutional responsibilities, which include. The Board of Equalization was established in the late 1800s specifically for the purpose of assessing the value of railroad properties. The reason for that is, and that's why it was called the Board of Equalization, because what they were finding is that as railroads were going from one county to another, they had extreme differences on how the property taxes were assessed. And so the citizens voted to create the Board of Equalization in order to have them do the assessment on railroad properties. Now, that has also grown into, under the Constitution, other kinds of things, such as pipelines, anything that basically, any utility that runs from county to county is a constitutional responsibility that we have to keep sure that they are equalized, that they are fair and equalized. So that's what we do. So we continue to do that. The board also in the Constitution was given the responsibility to deal with excise tax on alcohol. So we still continue to deal with that. And the board was also given the responsibility to deal with there's a tax, in lieu tax, that's on all insurances. And that's in the Constitution, and we still deal with that. The legislature couldn't take away our legislative or our constitutional role unless they did it with a 2/3 vote and gave it to the public to vote on. So we still have those. What they said as they made the speeches is what they wanted the board to do was spend more time in being advocates for taxpayers. Well, I mean, I'm okay with that. The only problem is I could be an advocate for all of you, I will be as I represent you. The problem is, but they took away my ability to actually change things that are wrong. Now what I have the responsibility is just pointing out the things that are wrong. So we'll continue to do that. The other issue we're going to continue to do is educate taxpayers. One of the things that I believe people should do is pay the proper amount of tax. Not too much and not too little. They ought to be fully aware of what it is that the tax fairness is for them. And so, unfortunately, I think oftentimes people are overtaxed. Let me give you an example. We found that the DMV, when you go to buy a car, right, and you buy it private party, and you go to the DMV to pay your use tax, or it's like a sales tax on that car, when you go in to register it, they take, how much did you pay for this car? And you say, I paid $10,000 for this car. What the DMV was doing is they were taking a look at your zip code. And regardless of what your zip code was, they were giving you the highest tax for that zip code. When in fact, some of those zip codes are divided amongst different tax agents. For instance, if you're in a county with one area, and there's a city there with the same zip code, your city may have a higher sales tax than your county. And you live in the county, they were charging you the county rate. So one of the things that we dealt with, and we continue to deal with even to this day, is to make sure that the DMV doesn't overtax you. So that's part of our role and responsibility, I believe, is to make sure you're paying the proper amount of tax, that you're fully aware of what is the benefits of that. And so we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to advocate for taxpayers in that process, and we'll continue to educate. One of the things that we do, that my office does, is we have probably 20 seminars, workshops a year up and down my district. My district runs from LA to the Oregon border. I have 9 million constituents. And one of the issues that we do is we have these seminars. And these seminars, we can have anywhere from 50 to 300 people. And they're all mostly businesses. And what we do is we bring together the EDD, the state, the FTB, the state income tax folks, along with the Board of Equalization, and we begin to we want seminars in order to help people to understand the tax system. Because the last thing we want people to do is to start a business, find out that something they did was wrong 3 years after in an audit, and then all of a sudden owe money and they can't successfully operate their business. They have to go, they have to close up their doors. I would rather make sure people understand the tax law. And to do that, we do these seminars up and down the state and educate thousands of businesses. Well, we're going to continue to do that. Let me just give you an example of why that's important. A couple of weeks ago, I get a call. My office gets a call from a guy who sells live bait in Stockton, California. And he calls because he just got audited. and he just found out that live bait is taxable. He didn't know live bait was taxable. The guy he bought the business from told him it wasn't. And so for 3 years, I think it was 3 or 4 years, he's been selling live bait, worms, and they're not collecting a tax. And now he owes $40,000. And he's going to go out of business because he can't pay the tax. That's a real problem. Who's that hurt? Does it hurt California? Yeah, it does hurt California. Does it hurt that businessman? Yeah, it hurts that businessman. You might have an employee too. I don't know. So our goal is to make sure that we limit those kinds of things, that we have as many people as we can that we reach out to inform them then that we have to be able to help them know the law. As I talk to those groups, and I usually go to most of them, one of the things I say in the beginning is, hey, look, when you went into business, you didn't go into business, you went into business because you had this idea that you had a food you wanted to sell, you had something you wanted to make and sell. That's the passion that you went into this business. You didn't go into this business because you had a passion to know tax law. You didn't go into this business because you had a passion to know labor law. But yet, if you don't get those right, they'll put you out of business. So one of the responsibilities I think we have, and I will continue to have, is to educate people so that they can keep their businesses. So that's what we're going to continue to do. Okay, other questions? No, no. She asked if we charge. No, those are totally free and we communicate.
Honestly, what does the government think about separating California?
Where does the governor think?
Yeah, what is the representation? Do they see the state of Jefferson as a threat, or they just wash it off?
Yeah,
right?
they don't see it as a threat.
So
they don't see it as a threat because they don't see the path to get there, and that's unfortunate.
well,
That's unfortunate. They don't see the path into the state, and they don't see a federal path. And until that becomes real, in terms of you can articulate what the path is.
well, we separated Obamacare. Those who want to stay on it, stay on it. I mean, if the Democrats want to charge taxes, let them pay the taxes.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to be stuck cause, what's that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to get their wallet out. Yeah, that's right. I don't want to be anarchist or rebellious, but
Right.
is there any way through the Constitution that we can draw up our own committee and stand behind them as a representation?
Again, my read of it, and that somebody can help me understand, is that problem is the federal law. Federal.
This isn't a law. This is unconstitutional. This is a system that is working. It's a machine. That's
Again, I agree with you. I agree with the
It's taken our
concept.
Constitution.
What you need to find is what is the path. What's the path?
What is the path?
And I think the problem is that you face a Congress that is not going to go there. And as a result, I mean, the reality, practically speaking, it's because do you think Congress right now, especially...
They're not Congress. They're not representing us.
What's that?
They're not Congress if they're not representing the people. If it's not about domestic tranquility,
Well,
and our rights.
Doug Lamalfa does a great job of representing you, so I'm not worried about where Doug is on the deal.
Well, yeah, but that's our side of the state that's getting overruled by a majority of fraud.
That we live in a society, in a country that is a representative form of government. And right now, that's the process. I mean, see, that's honestly, the same issue is going to be, it's the same reason why I hope you'll never see Puerto Rico become a state.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because we don't, the Congress does not want to dilute their authority. And all of a sudden, if you add additional states, you dilute the current authority that's there. So whether it's Puerto Rico on one side or state of Jefferson on another, I don't think they're going to, I just don't know the path there.
So how do we empower this movement to separate state?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if there is a way to empower it, because I think that's the challenge that you
What
have.
if we just say no
Say no to what?
to our system because it's unconstitutional, on the basis of it being unconstitutional?
Well, again, I never recommend people say no to paying taxes. You should pay your taxes, because unless you care to spend the rest of your time somewhere else,
You could put it in a coffer
Well,
and
that's,
pill it. You do have the funds there, but you don't, you're not going to.
again, I never recommend to people not pay their taxes. The consequence of that is way too
You
extreme
can
for
pay your
individuals.
taxes, but you don't have to actually give it to them.
You do. Under the law, you have to.
Well,
Again, you may not like it, I may not like it, but it's the law.
The law is unconstitutional. It's not representing us up to our forefathers, the way this country was founded on. This
We're a
is-
long ways from where our
Yeah, well,
forefathers
we
found
need
this
to-
country.
well, we
But
need-
again, you got to remember, we got there through legislators and Congresses making decisions then and getting elected after they made those bad decisions.
Well,
But again, I would never recommend people being in situations to where they say, I'm going to show you, I'm not going to pay my tax, I'm not going to do this, because again, the personal consequence is way too high. What you need to do is continue to work within, unfortunately, a broken system that we've got.
you're just going to have people more coming out of the taxized system or that type of business and start doing things more under the table. I mean, to where they're not part of this system. I mean, if they're after government and, you know, a person's freedom and their choice of life, I mean, there's a time that, you know, you just do things separately.
There'll
create
come
your
a
own
time when the pendulum
Okay.
swings back our way.
Well,
Just
yeah.
so you know, as
think
Clay
there's a time of
related,
rapture.
as Clay related to me at the Medetta transportation meeting, they refer to Northern California as the state of Jefferson in a derisive manner.
Okay.
Okay, it's a big joke to them. So just stay strong and keep fighting. That's the best advice
Yeah.
George, I'm sure, can give you.
Question?
I want to thank you for coming out this evening.
Mm-hmm.
As a young man starting off, and I'm older now, 57, but I started off and I got my check, and I seen that they had 5 or 6 ways that they could tax me.
Mm-hmm.
And as I grew up and got older, I realized when I bought my clothes that I was taxed.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at my utility bill, I'm taxed at home. I'm taxed on my utilities, my phone, PG&E.
Right.
I'm buying a car. I'm taxed on a value that's been resold. I mean, the working people are just pinched and retaxed. That's why people really want the state of Jefferson.
Right, I get it. I
You know,
get it.
we
I mean,
really
I
want
think
it, and-
I think I started this off by saying California's overtaxed and overregulated.
We really want to be good citizens and
Right.
pay our fair share. We really do. I mean, I've been in the Tea Party 8 years. You got a lot of hardworking, respectful people, but we're being pinched. We got people that are moving out of state.
Yep.
And they're going. They're not coming. And these are good people that are moving. I mean, they say, how many people can you have pushing the cart that are getting you know, when I was raised, if you didn't have the money for a phone, you didn't get a phone. And you got all these people getting free Obama phones and free rent.
Yep.
Let me ask you, what's coming? Are you going to tax people's rent coming? Are you going to tax people's food? I mean, what's coming?
I would not. Who knows what's coming from this legislature? I mean, I don't think anybody could identify where this legislature may go. You know?
You know, where's the breaking point to just continue to get pinched? I'm a landlord, and people are living check to check. You know, the fuel went up, the cost of delivering all the goods is going up.
Right.
Labor, the people aren't making any more money, and they're broken. I have never seen more broken people in my entire life.
So the question really is, and I think this is where you guys have to come in. That's fine. We've got a nice group here.
Yeah.
But you know what? There are a whole lot of people who aren't here.
Yeah.
Even in this conservative area.
Yeah, it's a shame.
So
Wish
I
they
think
were
the
here.
issue begins, where do you then help communicate that in order to get this room filled up?
Yeah,
Twice over.
Yeah, they
Because
feel
if we can't fill up this room in this kind of part in California, how do you ever convince the people in Van Nuys?
Yeah.
So I think that becomes then the issue for us to deal with. Because again, I don't misunderstand me. I think the idea, I tell people, as I look at my district, I say, man, that would make a really great state. All the Central Valley, all the way to the Oregon border. Basically, it's
That's our greatest
state
hope.
of Jefferson, it goes a little farther south. Be great. The only problem is I need to help people. I need to find. You need to have a reasonable path to get there.
That's what we're all looking for.
Not because wanting it doesn't get it. The problem is, what is the path? What is it that you were able to do to step that out?
I said what I said. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I have one more.
Uh-huh.
I was at a function and talking to some Democrats.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and I was told by these Democrats, the state of Jefferson will never happen because California is going to become its own country. And
That's not going to happen either, so.
I told these people they were crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, but there's actually people out there that are trying to this Cal exit and all this other stuff. There's people doing it.
It's not going to happen either. That's not going to happen.
All right, that's what I wanted to know.
Not going to happen. There's no path to do that. In fact, I think we fought a war 140 years ago where people wanted to leave.
Okay, last question.
Okay. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Governor Brown had just made an agreement with China. And
Uh-huh.
I was just wondering how much pull that would have over California.
Well, I
Or I
mean,
guess China would have over
I
California.
mean, basically, the only agreements that the state really can make are economic agreements, trade agreements that really have no basis of law. They're basically agreements that you can make to say, hey, we'll treat you this way, you treat us that way. We'll talk, we'll communicate, but they really have no basis of law. They're really not trade agreements as the way the federal government does trade agreements. I think governors do that only to, for fanfare, say, hey, look, we've got a whole new market over there. We're going to go ahead and grow jobs because we've got this new relationship with China. But at the end of the day, there's no real substance there. Yep. Okay. Hey, thank you very much tonight. I appreciate it. Again, you just go to my website or go to georgerunner.com. I'd love to get you on our email list so you can kind of see from our perspective the issues on taxation issues as they come up. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, George.